To diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com.
6:38, Team Hochberg Traffic Center time, and Jim.
IDOT workers this morning are about an hour and a half late at clearing road construction on the inbound ride. It was down to one lane overnight and well until past 6 o'clock this morning. This work is still being picked up. We are looking at a drive time of 85 minutes from 95th Street to downtown Chicago. Outbound, it's 14 minutes. Kennedy, 20 minutes. O'Hare to downtown. Outbound, the same. The Eisenhower, it's 29 minutes, 390 to downtown. Outbound, 28. Mount Stevenson, a little heavy approaching the Ryan. 30 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive. I-57, Bishop Ford, still look okay. Tollway traffic is fairly light. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. AM 560 Weather Center forecast, partly sunny and nice, 72. 53 at O'Hare, next news at 7. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas, great coffee, period.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Jason Furman was chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors under Obama, so you can't be too surprised by this piece. Biden's tax plan would spur economic growth, but that doesn't mean that he shouldn't be taken to task for his crimes against economics 101. Joe Biden's proposals to raise taxes on households making $400,000 annually and on corporations are broadly consistent with the tax systems under the successful economies of President Clinton and Obama. To reject the premise. It would devote revenue to an ambitious set of proposals to expand economic growth and ensure it more broadly. He cites models that suggest that the Biden's tax plan would affect economic growth positively, and so on and so forth. How could a plan that raises revenue have so little impact on growth? The Biden plan would only partly repeal the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Trump tax cuts, which also had very little impact on economic growth. And fun with numbers follows. I won't get into that. Smart provisions that would improve the tax code and economic growth, addresses the shortcoming of global intangible low-taxed income, a new category introduced under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that's he calls a loophole for companies to reduce their tax bills. He says of the plan in toto, it would boost the economy as near-term stimulus massively outweighs the immediate tax increases in both quantity and bang for buck. Goldman Sachs, another outfit that likes rent-seeking, the rent-seeking version of capitalism, found the stimulus would add nearly 1 percentage point to annual growth rate in year one, expanded child care, and so on and so forth. This is all intended to sort of lull you into to sleep.
I'm lulled.
Which is why I'm reading it as such. That's the whole point.
You've got your serious voice on.
The whole point is just to go through this. This is pro forma stuff. This is stuff that we know worked. It worked during Obama and Clinton. There's no problem here. And it's a very modest, moderate, reasonable approach to economic growth. It's just that none of that is true. None of that is true. The better characterization of this comes from Joel Ross over at Citadel Realty Advisors. He will add clean energy programs to renovate 4 million buildings plus 2 million homes, by mandate, I assume. Also cash for research on 5G, AI, batteries. Instead of tax credits to private companies, R&D grants, there'll be government-run research programs. It will take years to accomplish, will not be some instant boost to the economy, nor instant job creator, as Obama found, the shovel-ready jobs. Biden mistakenly assumes infrastructure spending will mean huge hiring immediately. The plan will be to send $8 trillion over 4 years, more than current spending levels. There'll be another $2 trillion more for pre-K college, plus increased teachers' pay. He owes a lot of heals the teachers' unions for all that support. Free early education for all kids, free college, community college for anyone earning 125 grand, which is just about everyone. Forget student debt, more health care spending, child care, elder care, plus increased Social Security payments, plus housing subsidies. All these are government-run programs. You might ask how all this is paid for. Simple, higher taxes on all of you and corporations. It's clear there's not enough tax money to cover all this, plus what the Bernie people and the far left add to the list. So the whole people earning 400 grand, over 400 grand, are not really impacted by higher taxes. Number one, that's not true. Number two, that's not going to be enough. They acknowledge big deficits every year, especially in the early years, to get to the goal of full employment. Then they go on to say interest rates will rise to 4.5% on the 10-year due to the growth in the economy and the spending, but it's okay due to the low rates in early years. This ignores, as Joel Ross writes, the long-term result of massive deficits. They don't explain how interest on the national debt gets paid at 4.5% 10-year rates without raising taxes even more or making major reductions in discretionary spending. They do acknowledge that the flood of entitlements will be a disincentive for work and savings, but that impact will be offset by the growth in the economy. As he points out, Ross, that seems to be an irreconcilable difference. We have disincentives to work, but people will still go back to work. Right. We just saw what happened when the extra $600, which they claim incorrectly had no real impact on the incentive to work for less. People didn't go back to work. They acknowledge stock prices will not grow much over 10 years. All dividends will be negatively impacted by the higher taxes. They acknowledge corporate earnings will be negatively impacted, so stock prices will also be negatively impacted. Again, seems irreconcilable that if there are lower stock prices, that raises the cost of capital for investment and lowers 401k values, which disincentivizes consumers to spend due to the negative wealth effect. This also means retirees living off dividends have less income, so need for more government spending on Social Security and other things. Also mean pension funds are even in more deficits and potential inability to pay. So you have your lower income due to high taxes, your stock portfolio no longer earns you good returns, your dividend income shrinks. That's the good news. This pro forma description of what the Bidenomics would mean as described by Jason Furman in the Wall Street Journal is a joke. This doesn't even get into the hammering that real estate would take, including the elimination of 1031 exchanges, which is in the Biden Comrade Bernie manifesto. You want to completely crater the real estate market and disincentivize commercial development? Do Bidenomics. For more on all this, we're pleased to be joined again by Jim Iourio, CNBC contributor. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I know this is all dense to many, but hey, look, this Biden is getting a pass on the issue that people say is their number one issue, which is the economy and the prospects for economic growth and opportunity and wage increases and so forth. And there's just, and this is on the Trump campaign too, there is not enough detail being provided to really drill down on just exactly how painful this would be across the board, equal shared misery, as is the socialists want, if even a fraction of what Joe Biden has proposed in his plan is enacted.
Okay. If you ever look at something and there's so many different ways you want to attack it and you get confused, and I felt like my head was going to explode as you were saying it. So I'm going to start just at the basis of what an enormous lie this whole tax plan is, because every Democrat has pledged their allegiance to MMT, modern monetary theory, or some sort of cousin of it. If I'm boring you by talking about modern monetary theory, I'm sorry. It can be a little bit dry, but people got to understand it when it's happening. But based in that is the belief that taxes don't fund federal spending, that just the federal government can create money and pay for it. If they're the issuer of the currency, they can do that at any time. And the only reason we would ever raise taxes, and this is, by the way, within MMT, who they all adhere to, is to take liquidity out of the market to fight inflation. So that's why you would raise taxes. So them right now just painting the rich and the businesses with all this money, that we're going to tax them to fund this. They know full well by saying that it's just not true, and they have no intention of doing that, and they don't even need to do that based on their own theories. All it is punitive. All it is you want to sell this notion that some people who are doing well, it's because they took some sort of unfair advantages, and we're going to come in on a white horse and right that all. The notion that you are going to start taxing businesses more, and that's somehow going to be good for the overall economy, is insulting to everybody. The only thing I wonder when I read these people who write it, is hatred gotten so into their head that they believe these things that they're writing, or is it just a big ruse they're pulling on the people? Because it's one of the two. It's completely asinine. You got me all worked up again, Dan. Thank you.
No. I mean, look, these people have never developed anything. They have never built anything. And then they accuse, of course, people of not building what they actually did build. Of course they do. And these policies in the Biden-Bernie Sanders plan speak to that. I mean, it would bring the economy to a grinding halt. And that is not an overstatement. And by the way, you don't need to be in commercial development to appreciate this. As I was going through, real wages, not to mention the value of your 401k. Do you care about that stuff?
I do, personally. And what I'll take it a step further, too, is that there might be this mirage, the kind of thing that happened during the Obama years, where the real negative economic impacts of a policy like that aren't felt as painfully because the government's going to counterbalance that with just massive spending. The Federal Reserve is going to keep rates at zero, as far out the curve as they can, to make up for this awful economic policy. And then guess what happens when that goes on too long is we do this bubble bust thing again, like we've done twice in the last 25 years. And the people who are left in the dust of that, it's just terrible policy. And that's the one thing that could happen. But the second thing that could happen is a real live currency crisis, a la the one we've seen in Venezuela and we've seen so many different times. And those things, like when all of a sudden the people who have money, that money's worthless, that's when the awful things start happening. That's when, a city like Caracas, Venezuela didn't have a rat or a stray cat problem anymore because people are chasing them down for a food source. That's the kind of thing what happens in a currency crisis. And I don't even mean to be melodramatic. It really genuinely happens, and that is what they're risking.
But Jim, you really think that could happen here?
Of course I do. I think that at some point in time it will happen here. But again, this, in my opinion, it's a long way off. I think that the dollar is the world's reserve currency. The rest of the world is no great picnic when you look at everything too. So things look pretty good here. I think it could be years or decades off, but I think we've already started on that path toward that. There's going to be many, many different exit signs that I believe we probably will take one of them, and it probably won't happen. But I think we're pointing toward that too. But it's years off.
Joel Ross, the commentary I was citing, he says if the Dems win, I'm out of the market. I'm better off with cash even after taxes. If they get control, cap gains goes to 39% if you're very high income, or if you decide to liquidate some of your portfolio. So paying lower taxes now is better than 39% on top of losing principal. Do you agree with that? No,
I don't think I do, and here's why. Because I think the one thing that these ridiculously high tax plans and high regulatory environments, if the Obama administration was a blueprint, one thing they are pretty good at doing is artificially inflating risk asset prices, meaning that if you just start, because when they start to realize that their economic policy is every word I thought of there was not suitable for radio. When their economic policy is bad, let's say that, they'll start pumping more money into it, and the money won't go where they want it to. The money just ends up in risk assets, and that's what we saw in tech stocks in 2000 and real estate in 2007. And so do I think the market could do well under Democrats? Sadly, I do, but it's based on their incompetence more than anything else.
This is difficult for the market to predict, but markets are always future-looking. And the precedent we set with lockdowns, now you have over at Market Watch, we need to act boldly now if we're to avoid economy-wide lockdowns to halt climate change. This from Mariana Mazzucato, who's a professor in economics at the University College of London. Now we're talking about economic lockdowns to halt climate change. And if it's a terrible idea that Europe adopts, you can be sure it'll be a terrible idea that Democrat socialists here will want to adopt.
When I hear something that's so ridiculous, absurd, radical, really comical, the one thing I hope is that there's going to be some logical people who usually don't see things the way the three of us see things, and they're going to hear something like that and go, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. So I love when people say that to show the level of their idiocy, but I'm not sure that people are going to do that, but I hope they do.
Well, and just one other opinion. Look, I mean, these opinions carry weight, and they influence policymakers, and they also give cover to policymakers. Pope Francis has chimed in again on a topic he clearly knows very little about. That's economics. He should stick to the catechism. But he says the coronavirus pandemic has proved that the quote-unquote magic theories of market capitalism had failed. The world needs a new type of policies that promote dialogue and solidarity, rejects war at all costs. That's actually called capitalism. The philosophy, the new type of politics that he's looking for is actually capitalism. Volunteer exchanges. But the thing that he does, magic theories of market capitalism, this persists. Voodoo economics, magic theories. We haven't done a good job at explaining to people what I just said simply, which is capitalism or free markets is just Jim and Dan freely exchanging a good or service.
Yeah, and we have to remember, too, that capitalism is a system that has a ton of flaws, and the outcomes that come out are not always happy, and they don't always seem fair. Some of the outcomes are bad, and it needs to be gently massaged. The thing that you have to remember, though, is just it's 1,000 times better than any other system. And the other system, socialism was tried 24 times in the last 50 years, and it's failed 24 times miserably. People point to the Nordic model and act like that's socialism. It's quite far from socialism. In the Nordic model, companies are encouraged and given the tools they need to succeed. In the model that they're trying to push on us here, that's not the same thing at all. And then when you say you want to lock down the economy I'm still reeling from locking down the economy to save the environment. I want to save the environment. I'm a big fan of the environment, but having people starve to death doesn't seem like the right way to go about it.
The jobs number last week for September and your overall perspective on the COVID recovery, such as it is.
Well, we have to. The inflection point is now on COVID and the pandemic. The things we've seen over the last week, and you couldn't make this stuff up. Truth is stranger than fiction. So now we're talking about 25 to 30 people who are directly in the public eye who are going to see the progression of it over the next 2 weeks. Yes, the president walked out of the hospital yesterday, which was this big psychological shot in the arm for defeating the pandemic, but that has to last. And I thought it was going to be, and the joke we always joke about on Twitter is, we'll just wait 2 weeks, flatten the curve. Well, right now we're really in a situation that the next 2 weeks are going to be critical. I think if President Trump shows up for that October 16th debate, if he really does like they're planning on it and he's feeling good and nobody else had bad outcomes of those 25 to 30 people we know that have it right now, then I think that psychologically people are going to be done with this. And I'm not saying you go around hugging and making out with people you don't know. Let's be smart. Social distance. I don't even mind. So I invented social distancing. I don't like being too close to people. So I'm fine with that part of it. But having restaurants closed and schools closed just seems terrible.
And I think it helped the markets too when Trump did that joyride outside of Walter Reed. It showed the world that I'm okay, and that helped with the European markets and with ours.
It did too, but it's so funny, Amy, that when we lost 50 handles in the S&P on Friday, everyone was like, Trump has COVID, the stock market's going lower. And then when it rallied 50 handles, I saw several different news outlets saying, well, now market's now pricing in a Biden win. And this is all like,
oh my God,
like 36
you can't make
market
this stuff
out.
up.
You can't make it up. And I'm like, and then again, I'm always when I hear that, I'm like, do they believe it, or are they just trying to perpetrate this nonsense to push their agenda? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think there's some people trying to perpetrate nonsense to advance their agenda, and then there's a bunch of Ron Burgundies on the desk that just read whatever they're given to read.
And if they read it enough times, then maybe they start to believe it, right?
That's it. Jim Iourio, CNBC contributor and the owner of Brandt's. Speaking of restaurants, Brandt's and Palatine, do try their ribs
Best
when you go.
ribs. Yep.
Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. I'll see you soon.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.